Hi, I'm eMpTyG, and welcome to another episode of Good Clean Commander. We're super hyped for today because we got some really exciting decks. But before we get started, just wanted to say if you've been enjoying the series, please drop a like and or comment, and don't forget to subscribe because it helps us keep making this content and continue to grow. Thank you to everyone who has been incredibly supportive and doing all of that. So anyways, let's get started. Let's have a good, clean game. Natasha is playing Kumena, Tyrant of Orizaka, and this Merfolk tribal deck is looking to gain repeated value and capitalize on synergies to deal unblockable damage and overwhelm opponents with a large board state. And in her starting hand, she has a Vivian, Champion of the Wilds, a Realm Walker, Korhelm Commander, Masked Vandal, Reflecting Pool, and 2 islands. I am playing Gluntch the Bestower, and my deck hopes to use group hug tactics and have my opponents take each other out while I build up my board state and hopefully win the game. In my starting hand, I have a Heliod Suncrowned, a Strip Mine, Farewell, Teferi's Protection, a Forest, Canopy Vista, and Beast Whisperer. Ginger is playing Rilsa Rael Kingpin, and her goal is to keep taking the initiative so she can venture through the Undercity and gain all the value. In her starting hand, she has a Demon of Dark Schemes, an Archaeomancer, Conjurer's Closet, Tainted Isle, Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, a Myriad Landscape, and Takenuma Abandoned Mire. Aaron is playing Osgir the Reconstructor, and his commander wants to get a ton of value just through artifact synergies, but also recasting them from his graveyard and making all the tokens to hit face. In his starting hand, he has a Karn, Living Legacy, Darksteel Citadel, a Wormcoil Engine, Inventor's Fair, a Boros Signet, Evolving Wilds, and a Blasphemous Act. Nat starts off the game by drawing for turn. She plays a Mosswort Bridge and hides away for 4. She then passes the turn to me. I draw for turn and play a tapped Canopy Vista and pass the turn. Ginger draws and plays a Myriad Landscape. She then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron draws and then plays an Evolving Wilds as land for turn. He cracks it now and fetches a mountain, putting it into play tapped. Aaron then passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays an island as land for turn. She then taps it to play an Ozolith. Natasha then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play a forest as land for turn. Paying 2, I then cast a Farseek and fetch an Arctic Treeline. I then pass to Ginger. Ginger untaps, draws, and plays a Tainted Isle. She then passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays an Inventor's Fair as land for turn. He then follows that up by paying 2 and casts a Boros Signet. With no other plays, he then passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a Reflecting Pools as land for turn. She then pays 3 for a Realm Walker and chooses Merfolk. Realm lets Natasha look at the top card of her library at any time and cast creatures of the chosen type. Natasha takes a look at the top card of her library and then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play a Strip Mine as land for turn. Paying 4, I then cast a Beast Whisperer and pass the turn. Ginger untaps, draws, and plays an Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth as land for turn. She then passes to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a Darksteel Citadel. Paying 1 mana into Boros Signet, Aaron casts Karn, Living Legacy. He upticks Karn's loyalty counter to 5 and generates a Power Stone. Power Stones can't be used to cast non-artifact spells. He then passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and takes a peek at the top card of her library. She then plays a tapped Path of Ancestry as land for turn. Paying 3, she then casts her commander, Kumena, Tyrant of Orizaka. Moving to combat, Natasha swings Realm Walker at Karn for 2 damage, taking Karn's loyalty down to 3. She then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and pay 3 for a Cultivate. Fetching a basic forest and plains, I put the forest into play as my land for turn, and then put the plains into play tapped. I then pass to Ginger. Ginger untaps, draws, and plays her commander Rilsa Rael Kingpin. When Rilsa ETBs, Ginger gains the initiative, which allows her to venture into the Undercity. The first room in the Undercity is the secret entrance, which allows Ginger to fetch a basic land and put it into her hand. She grabs an island and passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, and during his upkeep, he gains a life from Inventor's Fair. He then draws and plays a plains as land for turn. Aaron then casts his commander Osgir the Reconstructor. He ticks Karn's loyalty counter down to 1, so that Aaron can pay X mana to look at the top X card of his library and put 1 card into his hand and the rest to the bottom of his library. Aaron pays 2 mana, so X is equal to 2. Having no other plays, he then passes to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and uses Realm's ability to look at the top card of her library. Leaving that card on top, she then plays an island as land for turn. Paying 2, she casts a Coral Helm Commander. Path of Ancestry allows Natasha to scry 1, and she puts the card to the bottom of her library. She then looks at the top card again with Realm's ability and pays 3 mana to cast Cold Eye Selkie from the top of her library. Moving to combat, Natasha voices her intent to take the initiative. Tapping Cold Eye, she uses her commander's ability to make them unblockable and swings at Ginger for 2 commander damage. Ginger, unable to block, takes the 2, and Natasha gains the initiative. This lets her enter the secret entrance as well, and she fetches up a basic forest. She then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and pay 4 for an Archangel of Tithes. When she is untapped, my opponents have to pay 1 to attack me. When she is tapped and attacking, my opponents have to pay 1 to block one of my creatures. Since a creature spell was cast, Beast Whisperer lets me draw a card. Paying 3, I then cast Heliod the Suncrowned, which ETBs as a creature because my devotion to white is 5. I then pass the turn to Ginger. Ginger untaps, draws, and moves to combat, swinging her Rilsa at Natasha. Since Rilsa has Death Touch, Natasha doesn't want to lose her Merfolk and takes the 2 commander damage. Ginger takes the initiative again and ventures into the Undercity. Moving into the Lost Well, Ginger scries 2, putting both to the bottom. Paying 5, she casts Conjurer's Closet, which will allow Ginger to flicker a creature at end step. Moving to end step, she flickers her commander and moves further into the Undercity. Selecting the arena, she goads Kumena until the end of her next turn so Natasha can't steal the initiative again. She then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and plays a plains as land for turn. Paying 4, he then casts a 1,000-year elixir. Paying another 3, he casts a Molten Psyche. With great sadness, everyone shuffles their hands into their library and draws that many cards. Since Aaron has more than 3 artifacts, each of his opponents all take damage equal to the number of cards in our hands. Natasha takes 5, I take 5, and Ginger takes 6. Moving to combat, Aaron swings Osgir at Natasha for 4 damage. She declares no blocks and takes the 4. Second main phase, he casts a Mox Tanalite so he can match Natasha's playmat. It enters with 3 suspend counters. Having no other plays, he passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays an unclaimed territory declaring Merfolk. She then pays 4 for a Sea Hunter. Moving to combat, Natasha swings Cold Eye at Ginger for 1 damage. Tapping Coral Helm to make Kumena unblockable, she sends her commander at Karn. Ginger, unable to block because of Island Walk, takes 1 damage, and Karn takes 2, going down to 1 loyalty counter. Cold Eye dealt combat damage to Natasha, so Natasha draws a card and takes the initiative. She chooses to venture into the Forge, allowing her to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. She places those counters on her commander. Now able to, Natasha activates her Mosswort Bridge and casts a Cryptolith Rite. She then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and play a Misty Rainforest as land for turn. Deciding to crack it now, I pay 1 to fetch a forest card. Realizing I don't have any more fetchable dual lands, I grab a forest and put it into play. Paying 3, I cast my commander, Gluntch the Bestower. The table then cheers for their favorite jellyfish! I then follow that up by casting Shalai, Voice of Plenty. This gives all my other creatures hexproof. Since I cast 2 creature spells, I drew 2 cards from Beast Whisperer. Moving to combat, I swing Heliod at Aaron and Archangel at Natasha. Aaron declares no blocks and takes 5. Natasha, unable to block flying, takes 3. Since Natasha had the initiative, I venture into the Undercity and enter the secret entrance. I fetch up a basic plains and put it into my hand. On end step, Gluntch has a trigger and I have to choose 3 different players to give a card draw, 2 treasures, and 2 counters. I give Natasha 2 counters, which she puts on her commander. Aaron gets 2 treasures because he promised an IOU, and I give myself the card draw. I then pass the turn to Ginger. Ginger untaps, draws, and moves to combat. Wanting to take the initiative back, she swings at me with Rilsa. Not wanting her to take it back from me, I block with Gluntch. Since Rilsa has Death Touch, my sweet jelly dies. I place them into the graveyard. Paying 2, Ginger casts a Baleful Strix, which lets her draw a card on ETB. She then follows that up by casting a Callous Blood Mage for 3 mana. On its ETB, she decides to draw a card and lose 1 life. Playing an island as land for turn, she flickers her commander with Conjurer's Closet and takes the initiative again. Choosing to venture into the archives, Ginger draws another card. She then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and removes a suspend counter from Mox Tanalite, and then he pays 1 for an Amulet of Vigor. He then plays Rustvale Bridge as land for turn. It enters untapped because of Amulet of Vigor. Paying 3, Aaron casts a Cursed Mirror and makes a copy of Baleful Strix. He draws a card from its ETB and swings with it at Ginger. Ginger declares no blocks and takes the 1. Aaron takes the initiative and ventures into the secret entrance, fetching a mountain. Paying 5 mana into Karn's -1 ability, Karn goes to the graveyard, and Aaron looks at the top 5 cards of his library. He then passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and pays 7 for Anissa, Steward of Elements. Using her 0 ability, Natasha looks at the top card of her library and puts a Merc Fiend Liege onto the battlefield. Tapping 3 of her Merfolk for mana with Cryptolight's Wraith ability, she then casts Emperor Mahal II. This means Natasha has 5 Merfolk in play, which can be tapped later to put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk with her commander's ability. Looking at the top card of her library, she casts a Mistcaller. Taking another look at the top card of her library, Natasha leaves it there and moves to combat. Tapping the Mistcaller, she gives Kumena unblockable and swings at Aaron, hoping to take the initiative. Natasha takes the initiative again and chooses Arena to goad the Shalai. She then passes the turn to me. I move to untap, and Natasha untaps with me thanks to Mercfiend Liege. Drawing a card for turn, I play a Plains, and then I pay 6 and cast an Austere command, choosing both modes to destroy all creatures. Holding priority, I attempt to cast Teferi's Protection. Ginger responds to my Teferi's Protection by countering it with an offer you can't refuse. I make 2 treasures and feel very sad. Heliod is no longer a creature when the rest of mine die. I then pass the turn to Ginger. Ginger untaps, draws, and plays a Clearwater Pathway. She then pays 7 to recast her commander. This means she takes the initiative, allowing her to enter the Throne of the Dead 3 and complete a dungeon. The last room of the Undercity allows Ginger to look at the top 10 cards of her library and put a creature card from among them into play with 3 +1/+1 counters. She only hits 1 creature, which is Misfortune Teller, and puts that into play. When Misfortune ETBs, she can exile a target card from a graveyard. She chooses to exile Mercfiend. Moving to end step, she flickers Rilsa with Conjurer's Closet again, and she enters the secret entrance, which allows her to fetch an island. She then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, takes down a suspend counter, draws, and plays a mountain as land for turn. He then pays 2 for a Goblin Engineer. This allows him to tutor for an artifact and put it into the graveyard. He places Bronze Guardian into the graveyard. Paying 6 mana, Aaron recasts Osgir. Paying 1 mana and sacrificing Rustvale Bridge, he uses Osgir's ability to make 2 copies of it. They don't come into play tapped because of Amulet of Vigor. Not having enough mana for his next trick, Aaron passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and uses Nissa's 0 ability to put a Herald of Secret Streams into play. Paying 5, she then recasts her commander, Kumena. Using the Ozolith, Natasha puts 4 +1/+1 counters on Kumena. Unable to attack due to summoning sickness, she passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and stare at my commander, who I should have returned to the command zone. Playing a Plains as land for turn, I pay 3 for an Eternal Witness and return my commander to hand. Using 2 of the treasures that Ginger so generously gave me and 3 lands, I cast a God Eternal Ketra. While that is on the stack, Ginger responds by casting an Arcane Denial. I have no responses, so my zombie god is countered and goes to the graveyard. Paying 4 mana, I cast Hero of the Blade Hold, and this time my spell resolves. Having no other plays, I pass the turn to Ginger. Ginger untaps, and because of Arcane Denial, I draw 2 cards, while Ginger draws 1. Since Ginger still has the initiative, she ventures into the Lost Well again, scrying 2. Ginger puts 1 card to the bottom and keeps the other on top. She then draws for turn. Playing an island as land for turn, she pays 2 for a Talisman of Dominance. Ginger then casts a Sword of Hearth and Home. She then pays the equip cost to attach it to Misfortune. We have no responses to the equip, and so Ginger moves to combat, swinging at Natasha with Misfortune and her commander. Rilsa now can give an attacking creature +5/+0 Menace and First Strike until end of turn because she completed a dungeon. She chooses to have Rilsa boost herself. In response, Natasha attempts to cast a Pongify targeting Ginger's commander. Ginger responds by paying 4 for eMpTyG the Corrupted, countering Pongify. Natasha has no other responses, so her spell is countered. Moving to declare blocks, Natasha declares none and takes 15 damage. Misfortune has a trigger to exile a target creature from a graveyard, and Ginger targets Aaron's Bronze Guardian. In response, Aaron casts Argive Find and returns it to his hand. He then pays an additional mana to Swords to Plowshares the eMpTyG. Ginger, having no responses, is forced to exile eMpTyG and gains life equal to its power. Next, Sword, Hearth, and Home has a trigger, and Ginger fetches up a basic island and puts it onto the battlefield. Ginger flickers Rilsa and chooses to move to the arena, goading Natasha's commander. Second main phase, Ginger plays a swamp as land for turn, and then paying 2, she equips the sword to her commander. Moving to end step, Conjurer's Closet has a trigger, and Ginger exiles Misfortune. Since we had a few technical issues, it might have been a little confusing here, but it looks like Ginger targets Mercfiend, which was already exiled from a previous, ETB trigger. Anyways, Ginger then is able to make a 2/2 rogue token. She then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and removes the last suspend counter from Mox. He pays 2 mana for a Shrine of Loyal Legion. He then casts Bronze Guardian, given all of his artifacts Ward 2. Since Aaron has 12 artifacts when it ETBs, the current attack power of Bronze is 12. When Aaron casts a white spell, the shrine gets a counter on it. Paying 1, he sacks the mirror to Osgir's ability and gives Bronze Guardian +2 to its attack power. Paying 3 mana into Osgir's ability, he then makes 2 copies of Cursed Mirror. Bronze is now a 15/15 when those mirrors ETB. He declares the mirrors as copies of Bronze Guardian, which will be 13/5s because they didn't get the boost from Osgir's ability earlier. Since the Cursed Mirror copies have haste, he then swings the copies of Bronze Guardians at Ginger. Rilsa has protection from white thanks to the sword, so she blocks with one of the guardians, which dies because Rilsa has Death Touch. The other guardian is blocked by the 2/2 rogue token. Using a Power Stone to help pay, he taps a 1,000-year elixir to untap Osgir. Aaron then passes the turn. On end step, the token mirror copies become mana rocks and are no longer a copy of Bronze. Natasha untaps, draws, and pays 3 for a Marrow Reejerey. Path of Ancestry allows Natasha to scry 1, and she puts it back on top of her library. She then uses Nissa's 0 ability to cast Lulmage Mentor. She then plays Novigen Heart of Progress as land for turn. Paying 2, she casts a Quest for Renewal. Using Novigen, she pays 2 mana into its ability to put a +1/+1 counter on each merfolk that ETB'd this turn. Using Kumena's ability, she taps 3 merfolk to draw a card and puts 3 counters on Quest for Renewal. Then tapping Kumena for mana thanks to Cryptolith Rite, she pays another mana to cast Merfolk Skydiver. When at ETB, she can put a counter on a target creature she controls. She puts one on her commander. Muro allows her to untap Kumena because she cast a Merfolk spell. This puts another counter on Quest for Renewal. Since Kumena is goaded, she swings them at Aaron for 8 unblockable damage. She then passes the turn to me. I untap, and Natasha will untap with me thanks to Quest for Renewal. Drawing for turn, I then pay 7 mana and cast Amiria's Call. This gives creatures I control indestructible until my next turn, and I create 2 4/4 angels with flying. I then cast a Ghostly Prism for 3 mana. Since Hero is now indestructible, I swing at Ginger. On attack, Hero creates 2 soldier tokens that gain Battlecry boost, making them 2/1 soldiers when they attack. Ginger blocks Hero with Rilsa and takes the 4 from the soldier tokens. Since I took the initiative, I venture into the Lost Well and scry 2. Having no other plays, I pass the turn. On my end step, Natasha taps 3 merfolk to draw a card. Ginger starts her turn and untaps, and Natasha does as well. Drawing for turn, Ginger moves to combat. She sends Rilsa at me because I can't block thanks to the sword, and Misfortune at Natasha. On attack, Ginger has Rilsa's ability, Pump Her Misfortune, giving it +5 to its attack power, making it an 8/1, along with Menace and First Strike. Natasha blocks with her commander and Lol Mage Mentor. Before damage is dealt, Natasha taps her merfolk to put +1/+1 counters on each of them. When damage is dealt, both of Natasha's merfolk die because Misfortune had Death Touch. Their counters are placed on the Ozolith. I take 4 damage since I can't block, and Ginger takes back the initiative and ventures into the archives, which lets her draw a card. She then resolves the sword's trigger and flickers Rilsa again, which lets her venture once again. She enters the Throne of the 3 Dead and reveals the top 10 cards of her library and chooses a creature card from among them, and can put that creature she selects onto the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters. She selects Archon of Cruelty. When it ETBs, target player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, loses 3 life, and discards a card. Ginger chooses Natasha as her target. Natasha chooses to sacrifice the Marrow Readery and discards a Botanical Sanctum, and goes down to 10 life. Ginger also gets to draw a card and gains 3 life off of Archon's ETB. She then casts a Deadeye Navigator and soul bonds it to Rilsa. She then flickers Rilsa and searches for an island and plays it as land for turn. Moving to end step, Ginger flicks Rilsa again with Conjurer's Closet and puts the counters from entering the forge onto Archon. Going back a little, Ginger realizes she needs to re-equip the sword and puts it on the Dead Eye. She then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps and draws. He gains a life thanks to Inventor's Fair on his upkeep. Paying 9, he then casts a Phyrexian Triniform. He then sacrifices Inventor's Fair to search for an artifact to put it into hand. He grabs an Eldrazi Monument. He then passes the turn to Natasha. Natasha untaps, draws, and plays a Yavimaya Coast as land for turn. She then pays 2 for an Arcane Signet, and then follows it up by recasting her commander. This triggers Path of Ancestry, and Natasha will scry 1, which she puts to the bottom. She then uses Nissa's Zero ability and puts an Oran Reef into play tap. She then taps 3 merfolk to draw a card. Moving to combat, Natasha moves her counter from the Ozolith and puts it onto her commander. Natasha, after some deliberation with Ginger about where Archon is going next, decides to pass the turn. I start my upkeep, draw, and Natasha untaps with me. I play a Reliquary Tower as land for turn. I then pay 7 mana for an Elsh Norn. This causes Merfolk Skydiver and Goblin Engineer to die on ETB. I then pay 3 for Gluntch, and Heliod is a creature again. Moving to combat, I swing my 2 Angels, Eternal Witness, my 2 Soldier tokens, and Hero Bladehold at Ginger. All my attacking creatures get a +1 to their attack power, and I create another 2 tapped and attacking Soldier tokens that are also going at Ginger. Ginger blocks one of my Angels with Archon, Deadeye blocks Bladehold, and Rilsa blocks the Eternal Witness. Before damage is dealt, she uses Deadeye to flicker Rilsa. This lets her venture into the dungeon again, and she selects Trap and targets me. I lose 5 life. Ginger then takes all the damage from the attacking soldiers and my angel for a total of 26 damage. Since I dealt combat damage, I take the initiative and venture into the forge. This lets me put 2 counters on Gluntch. Moving to end step, I give 2 counters to Aaron and 2 treasure tokens to Natasha. Ginger flickers Rilsa with Deadeye again, and she ventures into the archives and draws a card. I then pass the turn, wishing I had spun out with Heliod too. Ginger starts her upkeep, and since she has the initiative, ventures again. Now, in the Throne of the Dead 3, she reveals the top 10 cards again and chooses Hullbreaker Horror. It is put onto the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters. She then casts an Effin Mutineer and targets Elshnorn. They are exiled, and I make a 4/3 Salamander, which I lovingly name Sally. She then casts a Displace and chooses to flicker Mutineer and her commander. On cast, Hullbreaker Horror allows Ginger to return a card to a player's hand, and I am devastated when she chooses to return my Sally. Ginger chooses to exile Hero with her Mutineer, and I am then reunited with Sally once more. With the venture trigger, Ginger is back at the secret entrance and she grabs a swamp. She casts Animate Dead and returns Callous Blood Mage to the battlefield. Using Hole Breacher, she bounces Ghostly Prison to my hand. For Callus's ETB, she draws a card and goes to 2 life. Moving to combat, she swings her Archon at Natasha. The Deadeye and Holebreaker are sent at me. Archon has a combat trigger which she targets at me. I sack a soldier, discard Ghostly Prison, and lose 3 life. Ginger gains 3 and draws a card. In response to attacks, Natasha attempts to Beast Within Archon, but Ginger casts Resculpt, which allows Hullbreacher to return a Beast Within back to Natasha's hand. Ginger targets 1000-Year Elixir, but Elixir has Ward 2 on it thanks to Bronze Guardian, and Ginger declines to pay 2 for it to resolve. Resculpt fizzles out, and combat continues. Natasha has no way to stop a flyer and dies. I block Hullbreaker with Sally, and once again, fate separates Sally and I. I can't block the Deadeye because of the sword still equipped and take 12 damage. The sword triggers and Deadeye is flickered. She soul bonds it to Archon and searches for a swamp and puts it into play. On end step, Conjurer's Closet has a trigger and she flickers Archon and targets Aaron with its trigger. Aaron discards an Eldrazi Monument and sacks the Triniform. He creates 3 golems when it is sacrificed. Ginger then passes the turn to Aaron. Aaron untaps, draws, and pays 5 to use Osgir's ability to make 2 copies of Eldrazi's Monument. He then uses a Power Stone to tap 1000-Year Elixir to untap Osgir. Moving to combat, he swings 3 of his golems and commander at Ginger. He then sends his Bronze Guardian at me. I choose to block with Gluntch, and Ginger casts Rebuild, which returns all artifacts to their owner's hand. On cast, Hullbreaker returns Osgir back to Aaron's hand. Aaron returns all artifacts back to hand, including his artifact lands. Second main phase, Aaron replays Darksteel Citadel, Mox Tanalite, and Amulet of Vigor. He then passes the turn to me. I untap, draw, and cast Soul Warden. Ginger responds to the cast and flickers Archon. I sacrifice another soldier token, discard Branchloft Pathway, and then I cast a Scute Swarm and gain 1 life from Soul Warden. I then cast a Yapamaya Dryad, which lets me fetch a forest card and put it into play. I put a forest into play and make another Scute Swarm token. With both creatures ETB in, I gain another 2 life. In an act of defiance, I use my Strip Mine to hit Ginger's Urborg. With nothing else I can do, we move to end step where I give Ginger 2 +1/+1 counters and 2 treasures to Aaron and myself the card draw. Ginger puts the counters on Archon. Ginger untaps, draws, and replays her Talisman of Dominance. She returns the Soul Warden to my hand. She then pays another 2 for Arcane Signet and bounces Gluntch back to hand. Next, she casts Essence Flux, targeting her commander, and bounces Scute Swarm back to hand. Rilsa is flickered again, and she moves to the Forge, giving Archon 2 counters. Moving to combat, she swings Archon for lethal at me in the air, Hullbreaker, Misfortune, Deadeye, and Mutineer at Aaron for 21 damage. On attack, Archon targets Aaron, causing him to die from his trigger. With this final attack, Ginger wins! GG, nerds! Thank you so much for staying till the end, and that was such a fun match. Like, everyone's deck did something really fun and really spacey, so that was just a blast of a game to play. And oh my gosh, did Ginger play super freaking smart? That's why she won. Uh, Usually we like to do MVP shoutouts for cards that we thought just really stood out. And honestly, it's a little hard to make a decision here just because I think everyone's deck, again, did some really cool mechanics. But if we're looking at probably what produced the most value, it was probably just Rosella, getting the initiative and letting Ginger, put out like Archon for free and some other really powerful cards. Hullbreaker Horror definitely did a lot of work as well of just kind of helping lock down the board and made it really hard to respond with answers to shut down any big creatures because Ginger was able to just recast a spell and bounce things back to hand. So that was a really powerful card as well. But again, we're really happy with how everyone did, and it was a great game. And oh my goodness, did we have a blast. So thank you so much for hanging out and have a good one. Bye.